Brooke Preston. She had a new job, a boyfriend of 4 years, and a fresh start waiting in another state. She came home to pack a few boxes, and her childhood best friend ended her life. Brooke Preston was 21 and had grown up in a small Pennsylvania town, graduating from high school in 2013. Friends remembered her as a spirited young woman who loved anything that sparkled, someone with a tattoo declaring that the sky was the limit. She had moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, to live with her sister, earned a business degree, and just accepted a radiographer position in Buffalo, New York, where she planned to settle down with her longtime boyfriend. So, who would want to hurt a young woman with everything ahead of her? The answer was the last person anyone expected. Randy Herman Jr. had grown up alongside Brooke and her sister in that same Pennsylvania town, graduating in the same class. The three of them had moved to Florida together and shared a 3-bedroom house, and people who knew them described a brother and sister closeness, with no sign of romance between them. They were, by every outward measure, a small family of friends building a life far from home. But Herman was unraveling quietly. He had a history of heavy drinking and 2 prior arrests for driving under the influence. And he had burned through a $25,000 inheritance from his late father. None of that, though, looked like a warning of what was coming. On the morning of March the 25th, 2017, Brooke returned to the house to collect her belongings before the move. Herman attacked her with a hunting knife, leaving her with many wounds, including defensive injuries on her hand. Then he got in his car, drove to a nearby park and called for help, telling the operator that someone had been killed, that it was him, and that he was sorry. When officers arrived, Herman was covered in blood with a cut on his hand. But his account of what happened was bizarre. He insisted he had no memory of the attack at all, that he had simply woken up standing over her with a knife already in his hand. From this, he built one of the strangest defenses in recent memory. He argued he had been sleepwalking, that he was not legally responsible, pointing to a lifelong history of the condition made worse by alcohol and exhaustion. Could a person truly carry out a violent attack while sound asleep and remember nothing? The science said no. A forensic psychiatrist testified that it is not possible to sleep through the act of stabbing someone. Prosecutors also pointed to a darker possibility, noting that Herman had reportedly hidden in Brooke's closet while drunk the night before, hinting at a motive the defense flatly denied. In May 2019, the jury did not buy the sleepwalking story. After only a few hours of deliberation, they convicted Herman of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Brooke's family, who had treated him almost like one of their own, had to absorb the impossible truth that the boy from their hometown had taken their daughter and sister. Where is he now? Herman is serving his life sentence at a Florida correctional institution, and his attempts to challenge the conviction have failed at every turn. His direct appeal was affirmed, his post-conviction motion was denied, and his federal petition was rejected in 2024, with a further appeal still working its way through the courts. The case later became the subject of a streaming documentary titled Dead Asleep, one that Brooke's sister fought to have removed. Gathering more than 100,000 signatures on a petition because she felt it gave the sleepwalking claim far too much sympathy. To this day, the case is haunted by a single question. Was it a genuine blackout, or a cold and deliberate act dressed up as one? The jury chose the second answer, and every court since has stood behind them. What remains is a family that opened its life to a hometown friend, treated him as one of their own, and then lost everything to him on an ordinary morning in the very house they had all shared. The next case would involve a betrayal years in the making, where the killer was not only a best friend, but the very man who had sold the victim his own life insurance. Mike Williams. He went duck hunting on his 6th wedding anniversary and never came home. For nearly 2 decades, his own family was told he had simply drowned. Mike Williams was 31, a successful real estate appraiser in Tallahassee, Florida, a former high school standout who was earning around $200,000 a year. He had married his high school sweetheart, Denise, and the couple had a young daughter who was still a toddler when her father vanished. His best friend since high school was Brian Winchester, an insurance agent who had sold Mike a $1 million life insurance policy. On its face, it was a friendship and a business relationship, nothing more. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Winchester and Denise were secretly involved with each other, and they wanted to be together without the stigma of a divorce. The affair had been quietly burning while Mike treated Winchester as the closest friend he had. On December 16, 2000, the couple's anniversary, Mike drove out to Lake Seminole to go hunting and disappeared. At first, authorities assumed he had drowned, even floating the grim theory that alligators had taken his body. It seemed like a tragic accident, and for years, that is exactly what everyone believed. But what really happened that morning? Winchester would eventually confess. He said the two men had gone to the lake together, that he tried to push Mike into the water hoping he would drown, and that when Mike survived, he shot him and buried his body far from the lake. With Mike declared dead, Denise collected about $1.75 million from 3 separate life insurance policies. One of them, the very policy Winchester himself had sold. A few years later, the two married. How does a killing like this stay hidden for so long? The answer is one mother who refused to let go. Mike's mother, Cheryl, never believed the drowning story for a moment, and she campaigned relentlessly, reportedly writing to the Florida governor nearly every single day for almost a decade, close to 1,500 letters in all. Letter after letter, year after year, she kept her son's name in front of the people who could reopen the case, long after the rest of the world had moved on. The break finally came when Winchester and Denise's marriage collapsed. In a separate and frightening incident, Winchester held Denise at gunpoint, and he was sentenced to 20 years for that kidnapping. Facing a long stretch behind bars, he made a deal, confessed to the killing, and led investigators to Mike's remains, which were recovered in 2017. Here is where the case takes a legal turn, stranger than the crime itself. In exchange for his testimony, Winchester received immunity from any murder prosecution, meaning the man who admitted pulling the trigger was never charged with the killing. Denise, meanwhile, was convicted of first-degree murder in 2018 and sentenced to life. But in 2020, an appeals court vacated that murder conviction, ruling there was not enough evidence she helped carry out the actual shooting, while upholding her conspiracy conviction. She was resentenced to 30 years, a far lighter punishment than the one she had first received. So where do things stand now? Winchester is serving his kidnapping sentence, with release projected for the mid-2030s. Denise, who had married Winchester just a few years after Mike vanished, is held at a Florida women's facility with a release date in the 2040s, and the state's highest court declined to revisit her case. And the most unsettling detail of all is this. Technically, after everything, no one has ever been convicted of the murder itself. Mike's daughter, who was barely more than a baby when he died, was raised in part by her grandmother Cheryl, the woman who never stopped fighting. She was awarded her father's estate and built a life in Tallahassee, the city where her father had once been a rising star. Two people he trusted completely, his wife and his best friend, had quietly traded his life for an insurance payout, and only a mother's stubborn refusal to accept a lie ever forced the truth back into the daylight, 17 long years after he disappeared. The next case is not about a secret affair, but about years of cruelty that finally turned an entire circle of friends against one of their own. Bobby Kent. He was the charming, popular one, the leader of his group of friends. What those friends hid was how much they had come to fear and resent him. Bobby Kent was 20, the only son of immigrant parents in Hollywood, Florida. A bodybuilder and surfer from a comfortable middle-class family, he was polished and likable in front of adults. But among people his own age, by many accounts, he was a relentless bully, and no one absorbed more of it than his lifelong best friend, Marty Puccio. Puccio had been Kent's closest friend since the 3rd grade and lived on the same block. The two were nearly inseparable. Yet behind that bond, Puccio had come to harbor a deep and growing hatred, the product of years of being humiliated and physically mistreated by the friend everyone else admired. How long can someone swallow that kind of treatment before it curdles into something dangerous? The plot did not begin with Puccio at all. It started with his girlfriend and Kent's ex-girlfriend, and it slowly grew to involve a group of 7 young people. On a July night in 1993, they lured Kent to a remote area near Weston, Florida, an out-of-the-way spot near a rock pit, with the promise of fun and female company. It was a trap, and Kent never suspected the people he had grown up with. There, the group turned on him and killed him, with several members taking part in the attack. One of them later recalled that Kent, realizing what was happening, cried out to his oldest friend, Marty, "Please, I'm sorry." Those words, a plea from the bully to the friend he had tormented, would become the haunting center of the case. The group then dumped his body in a canal, hoping it would never surface. But how do 7 people keep a secret that big? The simple answer is that they could not. Within days, several of the conspirators had confessed to family members, unable to carry the weight of what they had done. One of them, a relative of a member of the group, eventually cooperated with police and led a detective directly to the body, which was found just days after Kent disappeared. The plan to make him vanish forever had fallen apart almost immediately. All 7 were charged. Puccio, identified as a central figure, was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy and sentenced to death in 1995. But the story did not end there. In 1997, the Florida Supreme Court vacated his death sentence, and he was resentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The others received a wide range of punishments. One who delivered an early wound got life. Another who struck Kent received life plus additional decades. The 2 young women at the origin of the plot got lengthy terms that were later reduced. And the cousin who led police to the body served the shortest stretch of all. What does justice even look like in a case with so many hands involved? It is a fair question, because responsibility here was scattered across an entire group rather than resting on a single person. Each had played a role, from the planning to the act to the attempt to hide the body, and the sentences reflected that uneven web of guilt. As of early 2026, Puccio remains in custody at a Florida correctional institution, as does another of the men involved, both serving life. The rest were released long ago and returned to ordinary lives, a fact that still unsettles many who follow the case. The killing drew national attention and became the basis for a book and a film, both titled Bully, which tried to make sense of how a group of young people could plan and carry out the death of someone they all knew so well. The story endures because it inverts everything we expect from a murder. Here, the victim was the tormentor, and the people who loved or feared him most were the ones who ended his life. It remains one of the most disturbing examples of a friendship twisting into something deadly, and of how shared resentment can spread through a group until everyone is willing to cross a line none of them would have crossed alone. The next case had no plan and no long simmering grudge. It unfolded over a single night, when a close friendship collapsed into something nobody saw coming. Alexa Cannon. They were inseparable best friends and roommates. One of them once joked online that everyone should pray they did not kill each other. Months later, it stopped being a joke. Alexa Cannon was 20, a psychology major at Radford University in Virginia, remembered for her energy and warmth, even as she lived with epilepsy. A friend described her as a bright and beautiful person who refused to let her health setbacks hold her back, the kind of presence that lifted a room. Her best friend was Louisa Cutting, 21, whom Alexa had met online about 2 years earlier. The two grew extremely close and eventually became roommates, sharing an off-campus apartment and the kind of daily life only young best friends do. Alexa publicly celebrated the friendship, once posting how incredibly proud she was of her best friend. And then there was the post that now feels almost unbearable to read. A casual joke that everyone should pray they did not kill each other that year. At the time, it was nothing. In hindsight, it reads like a line no one could have meant. How does a friendship that warm end in tragedy? The answer is not jealousy or money or a long-buried grudge. It is something far harder to explain. On January 24th, 2019, at their off-campus apartment, Cutting attacked and killed Alexa during what both the prosecution and the defense agreed was a severe substance-induced psychotic break. It was not the act of someone settling a score. It was the act of someone whose grip on reality had completely dissolved. In the hours leading up to it, Cutting had gone without sleep for days and had taken a dangerous combination of substances, a mixture that pushed her mind far past its breaking point. By the time it was over, she was no longer in any recognizable reality, and the closest person in her life had become the target of a violence she could not have explained even to herself. Neighbors heard screaming and called for help, and what officers walked into was a nightmare with no mystery left to solve. When police arrived, the case was tragically clear as to what had happened. A blood-covered Cutting met them at the door and told them to arrest her, saying plainly that she had killed her friend. Afterwards, she behaved strangely, reportedly believing she had done something with the devil and acting in ways that alarmed those around her, praying loudly and growing frantic in custody. There was no whodunit here, only the agonizing question of how two best friends had arrived at this point. Could anything have warned them? In hindsight, people pointed to that eerie social media post. But in truth, it had been a throwaway joke, the kind countless roommates make. The real danger had not been any hidden hatred between them. It had been the spiral of sleeplessness and substances that overtook one of them in a single devastating stretch of hours. Both the local prosecutor and the defense attorney pointed to that extreme substance use as central to the case. Rather than fight over what had happened, they largely agreed on it. Cutting pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years of active incarceration, framed in court as a longer term with part of it suspended, along with a period of probation to follow her release. Where is she now? Cutting is in Virginia state custody, with her release projected for around 2039. She will leave prison still relatively young, carrying the knowledge that she took the life of the person closest to her during hours she may barely be able to recall. For Alexa's family and friends, there was no satisfying answer to cling to, no clean motive that made the loss make sense. The case stands as a stark warning about how quickly a mind can come apart, and how a single night can transform two devoted best friends into a victim and a killer. There was no villain lurking in this friendship for years, no plan, no secret rage. There was only closeness. And then a sudden, catastrophic loss of control that nothing could undo, and that no apology afterward could ever begin to repair. The next case was the opposite of an accident. It was a betrayal planned carefully in advance by a friend consumed with jealousy over someone he could not let go. Christian Aguilar. He agreed to spend the day comforting a friend who said he was in a dark place. It was a trap, set in motion by jealousy over a girl. Christian Aguilar was 18, raised in Doral, Florida, by Colombian immigrant parents. Kind, athletic, and devout. He was a first-semester biomedical engineering student at the University of Florida in the fall of 2012, a young man whose family had every reason to expect a bright future for him. His friend, Pedro Bravo, had known Christian since the 8th grade. Bravo had dated a young woman named Erica Freeman for about 3 years, and when she ended things and began dating Christian, something inside Bravo curdled. He became consumed with obsession, even transferring to a nearby college in an attempt to win her back. How far would a person go over a relationship that had already ended? On September 20th, 2012, the two friends spent hours together, ostensibly so that Christian could console Bravo, who claimed to be struggling. It was a story designed to lower Christian's guard. Prosecutors said Bravo instead drugged Christian with a tampered drink and killed him inside his vehicle in a store parking lot, then buried him in a shallow grave far from the city. The motive was as old as it was senseless: jealousy. At first, it looked like a disappearance. Christian was reported missing, and Bravo's account of their day kept shifting, at one point including a story about a hitchhiker who had supposedly come between them. But the evidence began to pile up in ways Bravo could not explain. Christian's blood was found inside Bravo's vehicle. Duct tape recovered in the case matched tape on Bravo's windshield, tying him directly to the scene. It only got worse for him from there. A newly purchased shovel was found hidden in Bravo's apartment, and it carried traces of a rare mineral that matched the soil at the burial site. Surveillance footage caught him washing the underside of his car in the dead of night. And then there were his internet searches, including one that chilled investigators to the bone. A query asking where he could bury a body. How do you betray a friend this completely and believe you can simply erase him? Weeks later, hunters came across Christian's remains in a wooded hunting area, finally giving his family the answer they had dreaded. In August 2014, Bravo was convicted of first-degree murder along with 6 other counts, including kidnapping and tampering with evidence, and he was sentenced to life without parole. For Christian's family, the verdict was a measure of justice, though it could never return the son and brother they had lost so cruelly. The University of Florida later granted his grieving parents an honorary degree in his memory, the first the school had ever awarded that way. A small acknowledgement of the future Christian never got to claim. But Bravo was not finished trying to manipulate the system. Over the following decade, he launched elaborate schemes to overturn his conviction, recruiting a fake eyewitness and arranging a false recantation, both of which were exposed and led to fresh fraud and perjury charges against him. The friend who had killed Christian and then lied about it kept right on lying from behind bars, treating the courts as one more thing to game. Each scheme bought him a little time and then collapsed under its own dishonesty. In a final twist, his own words eventually betrayed him. In correspondence, Bravo at last admitted that he had killed Christian, dropping the pretense he had maintained for years. Then, in March 2025, just days before he was due to appear in court on the new charges, Bravo died by suicide in prison, bringing a quiet and abrupt end to a case that had dragged on for more than a decade. What lingers is the cruelty of the setup. Christian did not die in a robbery or a random act of chance. He died because he answered a friend's call for help, walking willingly into a day that had been arranged to end his life. The trust that should have kept him safe was the exact thing used against him. And the obsession that drove it all had grown out of a relationship that was already over. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case may be the most disturbing of all. A friendship that ended because one woman wanted something the other had: her newborn child. Heidi Broussard. She had a newborn daughter, a young son, and a friend she'd known for more than a decade. That friend did not just take her life. She tried to take her baby. Heidi Broussard was 33, a warm, social, outgoing mother living in Austin, Texas. She had a young son and a newborn daughter named Margot, born only weeks earlier, with her fiancé, Shane Carey. By every account, she was surrounded by people who loved her, the kind of woman friends gravitated toward. And one of those people, someone she had known for years, was the woman who would end her life. Megan Firamuska, 37, had been Heidi's friend for over 10 years. The two had met at a church camp as young women, and their bond ran deep enough that Firamuska had a key to Heidi's apartment. But something dark had taken root. Firamuska had faked a pregnancy, carefully timing it to Heidi's, and had gone so far as to convince an ex-boyfriend that she had actually given birth. She had built an entire false reality around a baby that did not exist, and she had decided to make it real using Heidi's child. How far would someone go to live a lie that big? On December 12, 2019, after Heidi dropped her son at school, Firamuska abducted Heidi and the newborn from the South Austin apartment complex. She killed Heidi and drove the body, along with the infant, back to her own home in the Houston area, where she planned to raise Margot as her own daughter and finally make the pregnancy story true. That evening, Heidi and Margot were reported missing, and the search moved quickly. Surveillance footage and a witness placed Firamuska's vehicle at the apartment complex, and cell and license plate data tied her to the scene. The pieces were lining up fast, but investigators still needed to find the baby alive, and time was working against them. The break came through Firamuska's own ex-boyfriend. FBI agents followed Christopher Green from the Houston area home, and he identified the missing infant Margot as the baby he had been told was Firamuska's. Officers went to the residence and found Margot alive inside. Then they found something far worse. Heidi's body was in the trunk of a car at the very same home, just feet from the daughter she had been trying to protect. The baby was safe, but the mother who had carried her was gone. How do you reconcile a friendship of more than a decade with a betrayal this complete? On February 2nd, 2023, Firamuska pleaded guilty to murder, with the original capital charge reduced to first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 55 years, waiving her right to appeal. At sentencing, the judge told her plainly that she had destroyed an entire family. The number captures it. With one act of obsession, Firamuska had taken a mother from a newborn, a young son, and a fiancé, all so she could pretend the baby was hers. It was not a crime of sudden rage or a deal gone wrong. It was a plan she had built carefully over months, hiding it behind the mask of a trusted old friend who held a key to the family's front door. Where do things stand now? Fiera Musca is in Texas state custody, with parole eligibility not arriving until the late 2040s. Baby Margot was returned to her father, Shane Carey, and Heidi's young son is being raised by Heidi's own mother, who stepped in to hold what remained of the family together. Even now, questions linger. Heidi's fiancé has suggested that someone else may have been involved, a thread that has never been fully resolved in public and that still troubles those closest to the case. What is certain is the shape of the betrayal at the center of it. Heidi had welcomed Fiera Musca into her home and trusted her with a key, never imagining that her friend's longing for a child of her own would curdle into something willing to kill. The mask held for years, surviving holidays and visits and a friendship that looked entirely ordinary from the outside. When it finally slipped, an entire family had already been shattered, and a newborn had been left without the mother who died trying to keep her. The next case traded a stolen child for stolen money, and a trusted friend who killed to keep a secret from ever coming out. Linda Collins Smith. She was a former state senator who had risen from rural poverty to public office. The person who ended her life was a close friend she had trusted with her money and her secrets. Linda Collins, known as Linda Collins Smith, was 57, a former Arkansas state senator and a businesswoman who had built herself up from humble beginnings. She first won a seat in the state house, originally elected as a Democrat before switching parties, and later moved up to the state Senate, where she was known as a staunch conservative. She had divorced a local judge the year before her death. She was a public figure with a long list of allies, and one of her closest was about to become her killer. Rebecca O'Donnell, 49, was a longtime friend, a former campaign worker, and an employee in Collins' business. The two were so close that O'Donnell had even served as a witness in Collins' divorce, the kind of role reserved for someone deeply trusted. But prosecutors said that trust was being quietly abused. O'Donnell, they alleged, had been stealing money from Collins and forging her signature on checks, and she was increasingly terrified of being found out. What does someone do when a theft is about to be exposed? In this case, the answer was murder. Collins was last seen alive on May 28, 2019. About a week later, her body, wrapped in a tarp, was found outside her home in Pocahontas, Arkansas. So decomposed that identifying her was initially difficult. She had been stabbed. The motive, prosecutors said, was financial gain and a desperate effort to avoid arrest for the ongoing theft. The evidence against O'Donnell came from an unlikely source, Collins's own home. Cloud-stored video from her personal security system captured O'Donnell removing the cameras. In another clip, she appeared with what looked like blood on her hands, holding a large knife and a bloodied purse. Could there be a more damning record than footage from the victim's own house? O'Donnell also admitted to forging Collins' checks, confirming the financial motive at the heart of the case. She was arrested on June 17, 2019. But even behind bars, her scheming did not stop. While jailed, she tried to solicit fellow inmates to kill Collins' ex-husband and others, an extension of the same chilling willingness to remove anyone who stood in her way. It was a glimpse of just how far she was prepared to go to protect herself. How do you account for a betrayal that runs that deep? On August 6, 2020, O'Donnell pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and to abuse of a corpse, and she pleaded no contest to 2 counts of soliciting capital murder for the jailhouse plots. The sentences combined to a total of 50 years. She had faced the possibility of a death sentence, and the plea spared her that fate while ensuring she would spend most of her remaining years in prison. The case left a community stunned. Collins had spent her life climbing from poverty into the halls of state government, trusting the people around her along the way. The one who killed her was not a stranger or a political enemy. It was the friend she had let into her finances, her business, and even her divorce. The person with the most access to her life and the most to lose if the truth came out. Where is O'Donnell now? She is in the custody of the Arkansas Correction System. And for her own safety, she was reportedly moved to an undisclosed facility out of state. Her parole eligibility is estimated to be roughly 3 decades away. The case was later revisited in a national television documentary episode that traced how a trusted aide became a killer, drawing fresh attention to a betrayal that had stunned an entire state. What lingers about this case is how ordinary the motive was, and how extreme the response. A friend who had been quietly skimming money chose to take a life rather than face the consequences of a theft that, on its own, would never have carried anything close to the price she eventually paid. By trying to bury it, O'Donnell turned herself into a murderer, and the friendship she had exploited became the evidence that put her away. The next case also turned on money and trust, when a woman handed her closest friend a large sum to keep safe and never saw it again. Taylor Wright. She was a former police officer turned private investigator, someone trained to spot a lie. The person who betrayed her was a close friend she trusted with a small fortune. Taylor Wright was 33, a former police officer who had become a private investigator, living in Pensacola, Florida. Her early life had been hard. She had spent time in foster care as a young person before being taken in and later adopted by the woman who became her mother. By the time she was an adult, she had served in law enforcement, become a mother to a young son, and was navigating a custody dispute alongside a fight over a sizable legal settlement worth roughly $100,000. She was also beginning a new relationship. In the middle of all of that, she made a decision that would prove fatal. She entrusted a close friend of about a year, Ashley MacArthur, with $34,000 in cash for safekeeping. It was money Taylor would soon need urgently for her court proceedings, and she believed her friend would simply hold it for her until then. After everything Taylor had survived, trusting a friend with money should have been the safe part. So what happens when that money is suddenly gone? Taylor was last seen on September 8, 2017, and was reported missing days later by her girlfriend, who knew something was deeply wrong. Prosecutors theorized that MacArthur shot Taylor after Taylor confronted her about the missing $34,000, money she desperately needed and could no longer find. MacArthur then buried Taylor in a hidden grave, covering it in concrete, in a wooded area behind a piece of her own family's property, a place she believed no one would ever think to look. How do you hide a person that completely? For a while, MacArthur tried. As the last person to see Taylor alive, she gave investigators a series of inconsistent accounts. At one point, she claimed Taylor had left in a rideshare, but no record of any such trip existed. At another, she said the two had gone horseback riding in a nearby town. Yet cell phone data placed her in the area where the grave would later be found. Each story she told only pointed investigators closer to the truth she was trying to bury. The lies did not hold. A signature on the check connected to that $34,000 looked forged, and MacArthur's shifting accounts only deepened suspicion among detectives who could see the pieces failing to fit together. Then, in October 2017, searchers found Taylor's concrete-covered grave, confirming the worst and turning a missing persons case into a murder investigation with MacArthur squarely at its center. What could justify killing a friend over money? Nothing, and a jury agreed. After deliberating only a couple of hours, they convicted MacArthur of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, with a mandatory minimum of 25 years before she could even be considered for parole, meaning the earliest possibility of release would not arrive until the 2040s. An appeals court later upheld the conviction, rejecting her bid to undo the verdict. The cruelty of the case lies in the contrast. Taylor had survived a difficult childhood, found a home through adoption, built a career in law enforcement, and was fighting to secure her future and provide for her son. She had trusted MacArthur the way you trust a close friend, with something valuable and important, and she had every reason to believe it would be returned. That trust was answered with a bullet and a grave sealed under concrete. Where do things stand now? MacArthur remains in Florida state custody, with no chance of parole for many years to come. Taylor's young son was left behind, growing up without the mother who had been working so hard to hold their life together and secure his future. A friendship of only about a year and a sum of money that should have been safe had cost a woman everything. It is one of the starkest reminders in this list that betrayal does not require a lifetime of shared history. Sometimes it only takes a little trust, a little opportunity, and a friend willing to choose money over a life. The next case shows just how little a life can be worth to the wrong person when a childhood friend decided an inheritance was reason enough to kill. Sarah Stern. She had lost her mother young and inherited a modest sum to remember her by. Her childhood friend decided that money was, in his own words, worth killing someone for. Sarah Stern was 19, from Neptune City, New Jersey, studying art and television production at a community college. Her life had already carried real grief. She had lost her mother to cancer a few years earlier and inherited a modest amount of money meant to remember her by. Her father later said that Sarah and her friend Liam had been entangled in each other's lives since elementary school, a bond that went back almost as far as she could remember. Liam McAtasney was that childhood friend. The two had met as kids and had even volunteered together at a local fire department, the kind of shared history that builds genuine trust. Also part of the story was Preston Taylor, Sarah's former junior prom date and McAtasney's roommate. These were not strangers who wandered into Sarah's life. They were people woven into her history, familiar faces she had every reason to feel safe around. So what turned a childhood friendship into a death sentence? Money. In September 2016, McAtasney learned of Sarah's inheritance and told Taylor it was worth killing someone for. On December 2, 2016, he killed Sarah at her Neptune City home and took a safe, expecting to find a small fortune inside. He had reportedly imagined tens of thousands of dollars, perhaps as much as 100,000. What he actually got was only a fraction of that, a fact that made the killing all the more senseless. To cover the crime, McAtasney and Taylor disposed of Sarah's body from a bridge over the Shark River Inlet, then left her car on that same bridge to make it look as though she had taken her own life. Her body was never recovered. For a time, the staging worked, and Sarah's disappearance carried the appearance of a private tragedy rather than a calculated murder, allowing the two men to walk free while her family searched for answers. How do you catch a killer when there is no body in a believable cover story? The answer came from an unexpected place. An acquaintance of McAtasney, an amateur filmmaker named Anthony Curry, came forward to police with what he knew. Investigators then had Curry secretly record McAtasney, who proceeded to confess in chilling detail, describing how long the killing had taken and how much money he had expected to walk away with. It was a confession captured in his own voice, the kind of evidence almost impossible to argue against. Both men were arrested, and Preston Taylor confessed and agreed to testify for the state. In February 2019, a Monmouth County jury convicted McAtasney on all 7 counts against him, including first-degree murder, robbery, and desecration of remains. That June, he was sentenced to life without parole, plus an additional 10 years. Taylor, who had cooperated and given evidence against his former friend, pleaded guilty to robbery, conspiracy, and desecration of remains, and was sentenced the same day to 18 years under a law requiring him to serve most of it. What makes this case so disturbing is the math at the center of it. A young woman who had already buried her mother was killed for a safe her friend imagined was stuffed with cash, only for the reality to fall far short of his fantasy. Her life was weighed against a sum of money, and a person she had known since childhood decided the trade was worth making. He had not been pushed to it by desperation or rage. He had simply done the cold arithmetic and chosen the money. Where do things stand now? McAtasney is serving life without parole at a New Jersey state prison, and his appeals have been rejected, with the most recent denial coming in late 2025. Taylor is serving his 18-year term, with parole eligibility years away. Sarah's father has spent the time since fighting to keep her memory alive, channeling his grief into honoring the daughter whose body the river never gave back. For a family that never recovered her remains, the conviction was the only thing resembling closure they would ever get, an answer without a place to lay her to rest. The final case is perhaps the most chilling of all. A plot hatched online where a trusted best friend was paid to lure a vulnerable young woman to her death. Cynthia Hoffman. She trusted her best friend completely. That friend had agreed to a stranger's online offer to lure her to her death for a fortune that never existed. Cynthia Hoffman, known as Cece, was 19, a young woman from Anchorage, Alaska, who was developmentally disabled. Her father said she functioned at roughly the level of a 7th grader and worked alongside him in his handyman business. She was trusting and kind, and she considered Denali Bramer her best friend. That trust would be used as a weapon. Bramer, 18, was the friend Cynthia relied on. But Bramer had become entangled in something almost unbelievable. A man named Darren Schillmiller, in his early 20s and living in Indiana, had been posing online as a wealthy millionaire named Tyler. According to court documents, he offered Bramer millions of dollars to harm and kill someone in Alaska on his behalf. The two had never met in person. The entire arrangement existed through a screen, built on a fortune that was pure invention. How could a fictional fortune lead to a real death? Because Bramer apparently believed it, and she was willing to act on it. On June 2nd, 2019, she and a teenage accomplice lured Cynthia to Thunderbird Falls under the pretense of going on a hike. Once there, Cynthia was attacked and killed, and her body was pushed into the Eklutna River. Bramer then sent photos and video of the crime to Schillmiller, the supposed millionaire who had ordered it from thousands of miles away, as if documenting a transaction. The horror of it is hard to absorb. Cynthia had been brought to a scenic trail by the person she trusted most in the world, believing she was simply spending a normal day with a friend. Instead, she had been delivered to a killing arranged over the internet, in exchange for money that was never going to appear. She had no way to sense the danger, and the one person who might have protected her was the one leading her into it. Cynthia was reported missing by her father, and her body was found 2 days later. The case unraveled relatively quickly once investigators began pulling threads. Bramer and the teenage accomplice confessed their roles to detectives. Then the FBI, working across both Alaska and Indiana along with state police, traced the online scheme back to Shill Miller, who was extradited to Alaska to face justice for a crime he had directed without ever setting foot at the scene. A prosecutor would later describe the killing bluntly as a murder-for-hire plot. What does justice look like for a crime this elaborate? The sentences were severe. Shill Miller, the online manipulator who had solicited the killing, was sentenced in early 2024 to 99 years, with no chance of discretionary parole for decades. Bramer, the trusted friend who carried it out, was also sentenced to 99 years, and she received a separate federal sentence for an unrelated serious offense. The others involved did not escape either. A man who had supplied a vehicle for the scheme was sentenced to decades in prison in the summer of 2024. The teenage accomplice who fired the shot received a lengthy sentence of his own in late 2025, the last of the adult defendants to be sentenced in the case. 2 younger participants were handled separately within the juvenile system, their outcomes kept confidential. What sets this case apart from every other on this list is how completely it weaponized trust. Cynthia could not have suspected the scheme swirling around her, and the one person she leaned on was the very one leading her to harm. There was no old grudge and no spur-of-the-moment rage. There was a catfishing fantasy, a promise of riches that did not exist, and a vulnerable young woman whose faith in her best friend was turned into the instrument of her death. It is the kind of crime that feels almost impossible until you trace how each piece connected. A lonely manipulator behind a screen, a friend willing to believe in a fortune, and a victim who trusted exactly the wrong person. Cynthia Hoffman went for a hike with the friend she loved most and never came home, betrayed not by an enemy, but by the closest bond she had. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.